What's up, everybody? It's Dan from Binder Boneyard coming at you from the office. It is another cold February day. It's actually supposed to be warmer today at all of 50. But don't worry, there's a storm coming and it's supposed to snow and be like 7. So I'm hoping spring comes sooner than later. But yeah, so today's podcast, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. I always try to start these things out with thank yous because I appreciate everybody. All the Patreon donations, the subscribers, everybody, all that stuff. Couldn't do without you. Scott Stroud and the Powder Coat Company. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate everybody. This is also being live streamed on Instagram. So thank you, everybody on Instagram. Appreciate it. So today's podcast is probably going to be one that stirs up a few people because it might be a little bit outside of my nature, but it is, we're going to call this one Leave Well Enough Alone. There's a bad problem with people, DIYers, I'll say, that get into a rig and immediately tear it apart or think that they need to do something that doesn't need to be done when there's something way more important that needs to get done. You know, I get messages from people that want to know how to rebuild a transmission when they were in there, you know, because of a rear main seal leak or something like that. And I've found that when you tear a truck apart because you're going to, quote, restore it, that rarely do you get there. Like, it takes years. I know guys that, you know, they have regular jobs, they get a Scout, they want to do it themselves, and it takes them 5 years of weekends and after works and whatever. And that's fine, but they are rare. And I hate to, you know, I'm not pointing fingers, but I know a lot of people that do not have that fortitude. We see it online all the time. Facebook is full of people that started a project and 2 years later it's in a million pieces and they're selling it because they need the room, whatever. They've lost half the stuff. They've sold parts off of it because they needed money, something like that. So you really need to take a good, hard look at yourself and your personality. And I know that's tough in today's modern society, but if you have never finished anything, don't think that you're going to finish your Scout restoration. So that being said, if it does need work, take it in small bites. You know, I just saw a post the other day from a guy that he was doing the brakes on a Scout and decided that he was going to do differential work while he had the wheel hubs off. There was no problem with the diffs. It wasn't making noise. There was no metal shavings, nothing in the fluid. But he decided that he wanted to pull a carrier and replace the bearings that didn't need to be replaced, really. And then after he got in there, tried to run a pattern, which you can't run a gear pattern on used gears. It just doesn't work. And so now he's all freaked out that he can't get a pattern, you know, that his rear ends wore out, when all along it never made any noise. The bearings were fine. Everything was good. So if you're trying to build something or you're trying to make a daily driver or whatever, and it's not a problem, don't mess with it. Like, really, the rear end will let you know when it needs attention. And if you just need to do brakes, just do the brakes. Don't think that you got to do an entire rear end rebuild if you're just trying to keep this thing on the road. Same with under the hood. Guys like, oh, I want to do a tune-up, but while I'm in there, I'm going to reseal the entire engine. Like, well, it probably needs it because all international engines leak like crazy. But if you're going to do that, do it right. You take the engine out and reseal it that way. But if it's only leaking out the oil pan or only leaking out the timing cover, and you know that pulling the engine and doing all that is outside of your skill set, but you think you're going to do it anyways, really, really reconsider. Like, just take care of the timing cover. Just take care of whatever's leaking, because that other stuff, it might start leaking later, but you're going to get 3, 4, 5 years of enjoyment out of it before the next thing starts leaking or whatever. So, I see it all the time. Guys are trying to buy parts for stuff that's not a problem. It's like, and I'm using all my examples are coming from social media pretty much, because I see so much of that, where guys are just, and girls, tearing stuff apart that didn't need to be torn apart. And while they're tearing it apart, they're completely ignoring their gauges that don't work, or the fuel system that is scabbed together, or the fuel tank that's just in the bed of the truck because, they didn't want to have a new tank made or whatever. So if you have a legit problem, address it, but don't make problems out of stuff that's not a problem. I know there's the, the keeping up with the Joneses or whatever, where, you see social media and you see shiny red engines and brand new parts and, paint jobs and things like that. And you want to have the same thing. But just like with everything in social media, there's usually a lot more under the surface that you don't see. Stuff that's getting overlooked. The fact that they spent $30,000 on a paint job that somebody else did, there's a lot more to what you're seeing than just, we pulled the engine out and put it back in a day. Like, if somebody's making that post, then they obviously didn't do whatever they were doing correctly. Because even us here, which have done hundreds of engine reseals, it takes 2 days to clean the motor, disassemble, and then paint and reassemble. Maybe even more than that, maybe 3 days. So, don't fall into that trap of wanting to have shiny paint or new parts for the sake of looking cool on the internet. I'm guilty of it myself, but you will have more enjoyment out of a rig that you can use and send down the road. Yeah, it might be dirty, might not have shiny whatever, but you're going to get to use it. You're going to get to enjoy it. You're going to get to have, a couple of years of accolades before the next thing takes it down. And so that's what I'm really trying to push on to you guys, is to just really consider what you're doing before you take it apart. If you're doing a steering box, do the steering box. You don't need to disassemble the entire column and all the steering linkages and add a steering stabilizer and all that. Like, just address what needs to be addressed. And if the other parts are good, which a lot of times they are, especially the column. I've been getting a ton of calls from people who disassemble their steering column, and then they want to buy bearings and bushings and steering column internals. And it's like, I don't know how many trucks I've had for how many years where the columns are fine. Like, I don't get it. And and maybe they don't want to admit that they ruined the bearing or broke the bushing and they need a new one because they didn't know how the column came apart. Because I don't know if the service manuals give a column tear down. I've never had to look at it, but like it seems a weird thing lately. We've gotten more column calls than we have before, so probably didn't need to be taken apart. But anyway, I would rather you guys keep them on the road and address it one problem at a time instead of taking it down for a quick repair and have it be down for a year. It's just better, Now, if you want to send it to a shop that is skilled and you give them a list of stuff to do, that's one thing. But even then, a good shop should direct you to what needs it. There's been several times where guys have brought scouts in here and they're like, I want a lift, I want wheels and tires, and I want 4-wheel disc brakes. And then the scout gets here and it barely runs. It's leaking all over the place. It's a wire fire waiting to happen. And I go, hey, maybe you should look into fixing some of these dangerous problems before you spend, $5,000 on wheels, tires, lift, disc brakes. And some of the guys are like, nope, I just want to do that stuff. And we don't normally will do that job. I don't like to send dangerous stuff out. But, sometimes they're like, oh, well, I have a little bit extra in my budget. Let's take care of some of the dangerous stuff. So that, that happens too. But really, you need to look at your own project. Yes, if it's dangerous, if you've got brake problems, you need to address that first. Stop putting fancy 4 barrels and snipers on your engines if you can't stop. Again, I think some of it is the internet. You want to look cool with your sniper and your chrome air cleaner or whatever, but weigh the important stuff: brakes, drivability. I saw a guy posted his freshly restored Scout that he bought that had a gauge pod screwed to the bottom of the dash. So that tells me that it wasn't rewired and they can't make the factory gauges work, which is also suspect because it doesn't take a lot to get factory gauges working. But, he's all proud, and I don't blame him. I mean, you spend $70,000 on something, you want to be proud of it, but, gauges are screwed to the bottom of the dash, the head unit's crooked in the dash, it's got holes cut in the doors for speakers, and it just weigh the level of importance. Like wiring, and most people overlook it, to me is probably one of the more important safety aspects because of how many scouts catch on fire. And not so much anymore, but there used to be a big problem with them. The bulkhead connectors will melt and the alternator stops working or it catches on fire. So you need to weigh your safety side of it and drivability. But like I said, if the rear end's not making noise, if the transfer case shifts fine, transmission is okay, clutch works fine, you don't need to get into that stuff, if you're doing a rear main seal. And even then, rear main seal, to do it right, you have to take the oil pan down. So there you go. You can get your oil pan sealed up and the rear main seal taken care of. While it's open, handle it and put it back together. You don't need to take the engine out and do a complete reseal on it if you don't need to. And so many people, they're like, oh, while I'm in there, I'm just going to do this and that and the other thing. And they don't realize that maybe the part's not available. I see a ton of guys trying to rebuild their engines right now. You cannot buy pistons. There are no pistons available for 304s or 345s in any size. And even rings. I think Elgin stopped making piston rings So you cannot rebuild your engine without pistons and rings, but no one thinks to look into that stuff before they take it apart. So again, like I was saying, weigh your choices of what you're doing, do some research, and just leave well enough alone. Like if it's running, okay. If it's not rattling, or not rattling bad, like my 304 in the red truck, it sounds like a sack of hammers when I started in the morning, but once it warms up, it's all good. Am I rebuilding that engine? No. Am I driving it every day? Yes. Does it leak like crazy? Yes. So, you just weigh your options, but leave well enough alone. Like, it's more fun to keep them on the road and drive them and enjoy them than it is to have it sit in your garage for 4 years because you thought you were going to be able to do a restoration on weekends and nights. And, a lot of guys try, a few guys succeed, but mostly they turn into Facebook Marketplace projects. Especially for you guys, probably irritates more people here. If your wife's a pain in the ass and she's always up your business about crap in the garage or whatever, like, don't take your Scout apart. Please don't take your Scout apart because you will be selling a Scout project. If your wife's cool, then that's different. But I get a lot of calls from guys that are just like, oh, my wife says it's got to go. And that happens too. But if it's a running, driving rig that's semi-reliable, it's going to be a lot easier to justify hanging on to it, especially with the values going up. A $5,000 Scout 8 years ago is a $20,000 Scout now. So keeping them whole and just fixing what needs to be fixed without going over the top, that's what you need to do. Because it's worth way more going down the road, even if it does have some issues, but you can still drive it every day. It's going to be worth more than a project in a bunch of boxes in your garage. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Just fix what needs to be fixed. Fix the safety stuff. You don't have to rebuild your entire differential if you just have to do brakes. Like I said, or if you're doing a differential, if you got to do gear work or bearing work, you don't necessarily have to rebuild the brakes or any of that stuff. Like, you repack the bearings, put a new wheel seal on, and you're done. Like, don't overthink it either. Like, don't think that you need to have all new shit in there just because you're in there. Like, some of these bearings, we get a lot of Scouts in here with still has the original Timken wheel bearings, and they're within spec and they're fine. You just re-grease them and repack them and put it together. Like, don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. Just do what you got to do and get it back on the road. So, I know I've got 20 minutes now of harping on this, so I'm probably gonna stop. But this will be a short podcast because that's really the point I want to drive home today. Is just leave well enough alone. It'll let you know when it needs attention. Keep driving it. Keep enjoying it. Don't get overwhelmed by all the things you think you need to do when there's only a few things that really have to get done. And, make a list, be honest with yourself, approach those things in a calculated and thoughtful manner, and you will enjoy a lot more life out of your rig than you will if you just assume that you need an engine rebuild, an axle rebuild, transmission rebuild, full paint and body. It's just too much. So just be thoughtful. But anyways, so we'll hang it up for the day. Appreciate everybody. Thank you for joining in. All the Instagram subscribers, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it very much. No idea how much I appreciate you guys and girls. So, until next time, I'm Dan for Binder Boneyard.